Will you be jumping in on that exit poll? Will you be telling your investors time to get into India?
We've been saying that since the beginning of the year, and we believe that one of the easiest years to call in India is an election year, simply because of the tremendous spending that happens in that year. Because the way votes are won, both the parties would go door to door, village to village, spreading goodies, whether it's a bottle of booze, it's a microwave oven, it's a bicycle, it's a mobile phone. All of these things lead up to winning an election process. And as the leadership of NDA has shown, they view the business of running the country and the business of winning election as very distinct projects. And both of them sometimes even have conflicting ideologies. As a result, right now, the entire party has been focused on winning the election. No matter what it takes, they will deliver the result. And the exit polls, I'd like to believe them, but it's almost like who's going to sit on the Iron Throne. It's never known really till the last finale is done. So we'll wait another few days.
How much more upside if it is true that Modi wins?
It's difficult to call, but this week is going to be volatile. I would imagine if Modi does come back, there's another 3 to 4% upside down equity markets.
Is it a consumption story?
Oh, very much so. So, see, one is you view India intrinsically from what is going on in relation to its historic trend, which it looks like it is slowing down. But the moment you compare India with the rest of the world, it does present a very compelling story. There is no growth to be had anywhere else in the world. China slowed down to a 30-year low. Eurozone is struggling. US looking at a rate cut by the Fed later this year or early next year. With more than $10 trillion of global government debt in negative yielding territory, there is no growth to be had. Therefore, on a relative measure, India still looks more attractive than most of the places in the world.
If it is a consumption story, is it fair to say that the auto sector will be included in that? Because that's been the weakest link. In fact, it's had the worst performance among all the sectors in India.
Yes, I mean, auto eventually will come back, and we think led by two-wheelers more than cars. And it will come back. See, a lot of this consumption drive in India essentially germinates from agriculture. So even though agriculture is about 16% of India's GDP, it has a direct impact on more than 60% of India's population. And there's a very high correlation between a good monsoon and the spending power that is unleashed from the villages into the towns, from the towns into the big cities. And this process, this ripple effect of consumption, starts with a good monsoon. If we have a good monsoon and a timely monsoon this year, you can expect consumption to pick up by September, October this year.
Praveen, that's it. I mean, it is an economy which is dictated to by the strength of that monsoon. And it's also, as you say, because of the importance of the rural side of things, it then brings that into focus, doesn't it? Because there's been a lot of disenchantment, hasn't there been, with policies conducted by the BJP administration affecting the rural side of things here. How does this government address that?
It's been a tough call for Prime Minister Modi to walk a very fine line, managing both sides, the extreme left-wingers and the right-wingers in his own party. And bulk of the reform, I would say, has been pitched at the bottom 25% of the country's population. If you look at bringing sanitation to villages, bringing toilets to rural schools to allow girls to go to school and get a primary education, all of these things have been aimed at improving rural India with a time horizon of 10 to 15 years. In the immediate short term, I guess raising the minimum support price for farmers was a step in the right direction, however, too little, too late. And as we can see, that inflation has been undershooting the target of the central bank for better part of this year. We are still at 2.9% of CPI, when we should have liked to be somewhere closer to 4%. So rural distress probably is the biggest agenda on Modi's post-win term. And as he has very rightly highlighted, that water security, water management is going to be his biggest drive in his next term. We don't expect any big bang reforms in his next term, because all that is done and dusted. The bankruptcy reform,
Praveen,
the GST, that's done.
Praveen, then Okay, with the a trade war, of course, taking place at the moment between China and the United States, that caused global ripples. India being one economy which is largely driven by its domestic industries and the consumption story being intact in part, at least, does it not make it a haven then as well compared to what's going on elsewhere?
I would agree completely. However, in this super connected world, nobody can afford to be an innocent bystander anymore. So the way the trade war impacts India is that, let's say you're a pension fund manager sitting in Stockholm or New York, and you suddenly take an adverse view of emerging markets because China is doing badly as a result of trade wars. How do you express the China negative view? Bulk of it comes by dumping global emerging market ETFs and funds, because China is a big proportion of that. So is India, a smaller proportion, but then India becomes collateral damage every time anywhere in the world adverse EM view is expressed. So we will continue to see a degree of volatility when it comes to Indian investments. But in the long term, the intrinsic growth driven by consumption, as you rightly said, is going to make the difference.
We have a lot more to do. You said he's done some of the big policy moves, and such as GST in particular. But what about, let's say, the aerospace side of things? It's one part of the economy which Jet Airways is probably emblematic, and various others, of there being still some of those restrictive practices that have been there for years.
Yeah, I mean, airline industry, it's plagued with all kinds of problems almost globally. And just reminds me of what Richard Branson said: the best way to become a millionaire in the airline business is to start off as a billionaire. So given the fluctuations of oil prices and the hedging that most airlines do, and the way routes are decided, the most profitable ones have been given to Jet in India. And despite all of that, they've struggled. And even Indigo has shown some signs of stress. So the opening up of the airline industry for foreign participation was a great move, but we have to see further improvements in the sector.
Where else? What else needs to be done to make India a more open economy as well here, Praveen?
I think it's a bit of more of the same, however jaded that may sound. It starts with credit. There is a serious need for expansionary credit in the country. And the public sector banks aren't just matching up to the challenge. They need greater injection of capital. So the SME sector, which is really the lifeblood of India's economy, the private enterprise, the private capital that drives India, that is starving for capital. And post the ILFS default, we've seen even the shadow banking side come off a bit. So that's where I think is the secret trigger: credit.
Praveen, after the elections, the focus goes back to the economy, goes back to what the RBI will do. What are your assumptions? And also earnings.
Well, earnings have actually been the one bright light in this dark scenario, because earnings have improved after nearly a gap of 7 years. Between 2011 and 2018, the growth of earnings of the index was below 5%. And already in 2018, we've breached 9%. So earnings, thankfully, have started improving. And I think India has entered a zone, a new cycle, where we will see earnings in mid-teens. RBI has to cut interest rates simply because of the inflation targeting by the Monetary Policy Committee. We know that they can't be more than 2% of inflation. And we are CPI at below 3% right now. So overnight rates at 6%, not justified.
Question is, how soon? And how many?
At least 2 rate cuts, one possibly in next month, but one definitely after the monsoon, so September.
And in terms of growth, Modi needs to increase the growth that the country has right now to pull more people out of poverty. How soon can he do that, and what would it take?
I guess the animal spirits of the country, which have always worked in favor, they need to be unleashed by 1, credit, and 2, we need to see an increase of government spending, which would strengthen Modi's hand if he has greater tax collection. So we need to see more government spending, infrastructure, logistics. That's where Modi needs to spend more money.
Praveen, my final question. Marks out of 10 for the first administration, assuming there's going to be a second one.
Oh, easily, I would say 8.5.
Wow.
Okay, how does he get it to 10?
Oh, he could have tackled, I would say, the two remaining blockbuster reforms the country needs. Some of that is labor reform, and the other is land reform.